little lady be good. Goody, 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 goody to me. I'm a lone sheep in the woods. Way out in the wood, be good, 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 good. Alone in this great big city where the lights bright and the traffic lights, everything is blink, 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 blink. Oh, I, lady, be good, good, good. Oh, don't be bad because Santa Claus coming to town. Be ready. Sweet little lady, be good. Oh, goody, goody, goody. All alone, lone, lone, lone. Stacey Bones, all alone. Oh, the great big city with the trolley, and the buses go bling, bling, clink, clink-a-link-a, bang, bang. Then you don't know anything about the traffic lights. You got to be good because I never could find you. If I look through the city, all I know, and that's what I... Hey, lady, oh, lady, be good to me. Oh, my lady, be good to me. Bum, 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 bum. Be good, good, good.
Little special message there for my guest in this second hour of the programme this evening. It says, of course, Alison Kerr, Lady Be Good to Me. Slim Gaillard writes again. That was from a Dot record originally, but it's been re-released in a little kind of cardboard thing by the Verve Music Group. So, but it doesn't actually tell you every that's on it or anything like that, so that's why I'm not. How are you, Ms. Kerr?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
And you?
Lovely to have you. Well, I've got that seasonally affected depression, but as you said during the news, you've got that every season. But
at least you're,
I'm surviving. I'm holding on.
Good.
It was so dark today, 1:30. Anyway, enough of that. Here we are to brighten up everybody's lives.
Well, this should brighten up your life.
Who's
What
got
we're
his
doing.
head in his hands already. He's not going to start getting on like that, is he? Sorry, yes, you're going to brighten up my life with something very special.
Yes, the cheerful little earful, Fats Waller, because Alan Shipton, the writer and broadcaster, has just revived his book that he wrote in the 80s, the biography of Fats Waller. So I thought I'd ease you in gently with some Alligator Crawl.
Cool. Fats. They don't make them like that anymore.
That was Alligator Crawl from 1935. So I spoke to Alan Shipton the other week and I asked him what made him want to write about Fats Waller in the first place when he did the book in 1986.
Well, I've been fascinated by Fats Waller ever since I first discovered jazz when I was a small child. And I think what happened was that my dad came back from the Far East during the war and he'd been stationed in Hong Kong. And at the time, Radio Hong Kong were chucking out a lot of records, and amongst them was a great stack of Fats Waller discs. So wrapped up in cotton wool and whatever, he brought them back from the Far East, and when I was a kid, that's what we played at home. So I've known Fats Waller's music ever since I was a very small child, and so I suppose it went in with the milk, really.
I wish I'd been in that position, actually. I guess my parents must have known about Fats Waller, but we didn't have much of it around the house. But I remember kind of, quite late on in life, very much kind of getting into Fats Waller, and particularly up in Harlem at a table for two.
There were four of us.
Me, your big feet, and you.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's got a really gorgeous voice. When you hear some of the stuff that the last track we played was from the radio transcripts that were done in 1935, and you really hear how he's got a really lovely voice when he's not just sort of hamming it up and mugging and everything.
It just can't fail to kind of lift your spirits.
Exactly.
There's just so much humour in it.
Yeah, but he was really good on ballads as well. So I asked Alan Shipton if there were any particular songs when he was growing up that were favourites.
Oh, well, those were all the ones that everybody knows, I suppose, or at least knew in those days. They used to be on Housewife's Choice in the morning, on the light programme, as it then was. Things like The Spider and the Fly, My Very Good Friend the Milkman. A lot of those very popular songs that Fats really bridged the gulf between being a pure and simple jazz entertainer and somebody who really broke through to a much bigger audience. And so those were the things I started with, and it wasn't until later that I realised just what a fantastic pianist he was and how great some of the arrangements were for the band.
A terrible admission I have to make after that is that I can remember Housewife's Choice. I was very, very small.
Yeah, right.
It was in my auntie's kitchen in Hindland. And I remember the Housewife's Choice thing.
But do you remember The Spider and the Fly being played on it?
I don't.
Well, I thought we would hear, rather than the record, which is probably more familiar, I thought we'd hear another radio transcript version of it because it's got a lovely introduction from Fats.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you the great, gorgeous, gigantic overture known as the Webb Song. You've never heard it by Tchaikovsky, you never heard it by Rimsky-Korsakov, because they didn't know any better. But now, I bring you one of yours truly, Little Fats Waller's Spider and the Fly. I'm coming out of the web. Be careful now, I'll vamp you in. Won't you come into my parlor, send the spider to the fly. I've the cutest little living room that you did ever spy. Oh, fly, bye-bye, bye-bye, oh, fly. Because she walked into his parlor, unsuspecting little fly. Please come in, my fine young maiden. Let me rest your dainty hat. We'll have tea out on the terrace and a friendly little chat. Oh, fly, bye-bye, bye-bye, oh, fly. Because she walked into his parlor, unsuspecting little fly. See my art collection, it's the best that gold can buy. Not to speak of my fine etchings that will surely please your eye. Oh, fly, bye-bye, bye-bye, oh, fly. Because she walked into his parlor, unsuspecting little fly. Come out of that web.
There wasn't a shortage of books on Fats, but they all took the same line, which was that he was this great pianist whose career was sidelined by being a funny man and an entertainer, and he never quite fulfilled his potential. And what I set out to do was to say, well, actually, as a recording artist, and a composer and a band leader, his potential was amply fulfilled.
Why has he kind of decided to, sort of change the book and stuff like that?
Well, that's what I asked him. Why now, especially because I wondered if new material, information had come to light, or if he'd managed to conduct some new interviews or something. So here's what he said.
Well, over the last few years, as you probably know, I've been popping up on various BBC programmes talking to elderly musicians. And one group of them that I really tried to track down and talk to was as many survivors of Fats Waller's bands as possible. And last year I was able to do a very long interview with Al Casey, the guitarist who played in Fats's band, somebody I'd known and toured with in the 80s, but didn't really ever sit down and do a proper interview with when I was doing the original book. And Al opened my eyes to quite a lot of things. Also, I met a guy called Franz Jackson, who played tenor sax in Fats's big band in the 40s. We also played together in the 80s, but again, I hadn't had a chance to sit down and really tackle him on what it was like to be with Fats and so on. So with these new interviews, and I think a bit of a different take on some bits of his life, I thought it was time to revise the book.
Alan Shipton talking about why he decided to revise this particular book. It's rather a nice book, actually. I was having a quick look at it in the office the other day. It's got fantastic photographs and things.
It's a very slim book as well, which I was quite surprised about. But he does really seem to cover every aspect of Waller's career. I mean, he's divided it up into things like the movies because, Fats Waller, his personality was so well established, partly because of his work on radio, because he became a radio star. He was sort of syndicated all across America, and also he's so well known because of the legacy he left in terms of movies. And so he's divided the book up into all these different aspects: the movies, the radio broadcasts, the records, and the shows that he composed the music for on Broadway, because that's another aspect which isn't terribly well remembered. It's a sort of lesser known aspect of him.
Is there anything about that trip to Edinburgh where he rolled out of the taxi?
There's nothing at all.
So that was one of the best stories you ever told about Fats Waller, when he rolled out of the taxi.
And it's probably apocryphal.
It probably didn't really happen, but I still think that we should write the film script for that. Anyway, what else? Should we see what else Alan has to say about it?
I asked him if there was any sort of new take on Waller in the new book.
There's not much of a new take, in the sense that I still think that the main point of the book is to draw people's attention to Fats's work in the recording studio, on the radio particularly, because he's a great radio artist, and the broadcasts which featured him weren't really issued. They just came out on record within a very short time before the original book came out, and since then lots more broadcasts have appeared. So I wanted to focus on Fats the broadcaster, because I think that had a lot to do with his popularity in the States.
I'm walking on air, for I've left all my blue days behind. I've learned how to care, and there's love, really love on my mind. I'm the world's most happy creature, tell me what can worry me. I'm crazy about my baby, baby's crazy about me. Mr. Cupid was the teacher, and the reason we agree, I'm crazy about my baby. Baby's crazy about me. Pause and get that book, hold it in your hand. Keep a steady lookout, you can understand. It's an A1 combination, perfect he and she. Crazy about my baby, yes, baby's crazy about me. look out, you can understand. A1 preacher and I'll get the preacher. Are you ready? I'm crazy about my baby. My baby's crazy about me. Here it is, babes. Your license number is 94136.
That is another of my all-time favourite tracks.
I know.
Actually.
I was torn actually because there's
Crazy
that
about my
version
baby.
which he's got his band on, the rhythm he's got on that version, and then there's another one from a radio transcription where he's doing it solo, and you know he manages to make it quite different every time. But there's always the same words he uses. You know, I'm effervescent. I'm
right,
exasperated by my offspring, and my offspring's exasperated by me. So that one was from.
It's great poetry, you know. I mean,
It's great playing words. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Marty Gross does as well, you know, and he sort of, you know, he was very much inspired by Fats, but he sort of changes the words around and he always gets a laugh. It's, you know, and he's obviously very intelligent.
Let me remind you that you're listening to Bebop to Hip Hop on Radio Scotland, and we're in the medieval kind of days of jazz. They're great days. I'm just, you know, this is actually a Dizzy Gillespie quote. You can also hear us at www.bbc.co.uk/Radio Scotland. Then click on Bebop to Hip Hop on the programme selector, and we're always there. You can write to us at Bebop to Hip Hop, Radio Scotland, Queen Margaret Drive, Glasgow G12. Email me at david.sillers@bbc.co.uk, or stay tuned to that dial 92 to 95 FM and 810 medium wave is Radio Scotland. Alison.
Yeah, so that was Crazy About My Baby from 1939, Fats Waller and His Rhythm, and it featured on tenor sax Gene Cedric, who, interestingly, was the guy who taught Woody Allen some clarinet.
That would be nice to have somebody like that as your clarinet teacher.
Well, yeah.
Let's move to New York.
Okay. Henry Allen Shipton was very enthusiastic about the radio broadcasts, which have been released on record in the last, or on CD in the last sort of 20 years, and quite a few of them appeared around the time that his original book came out. And so I asked him what the particular appeal of these radio broadcasts was.
What's great about them is that the band played a lot of its hits, so you get really good quality sound alternatives of the band playing songs that they played in the studio for records, but they didn't have to stop at the end of a 78 RPM record. They could actually play for longer, so you get much more tenor solos from Gene Cedric or Rudy Powell, you get much longer trumpet solos from Herman Autry, but the great thing, of course, is you get more of Fats himself, and there are some fantastic versions of his set pieces like Handful of Keys, which was one of the most difficult pieces that any of those Harlem Stride pianists could tackle, and the version of that I think there are three versions from the broadcasts, but there's one that I go into some detail about in the book, where in the middle of it he obviously forgot what he was doing, and he plays a completely different middle section from the one on the record, because of course Fats was such a fantastic composer and improviser that even when he was thrown by forgetting something, you'd never really have known unless you happened to remember the original record. He just carried on, put something else in its place, and make some kind of witty comment as he goes through. But Handful of Keys is a good example.
Now a quick hello to Red and Caddy in Glasgow, Watson and Navy 17, Jack Kaufman and the ATC out at 636, and Duckaday and the Post Engineers at 938. Sparks Robertson and the boys on one of His Majesty's motor launches. Love to the Four Musketeers, Joe, Ollie, Curry, and Frank, and everybody else on the Persian Gulf. And how about the gang in Greenland who write, please send us hot music, a heating pad, hot buttered rum, and Betty Grable. And Command Performance gets plenty of letters, too, that say this. Ask the one and only Fats, your feet's too big Walla, to sashay up to the ivories and spread himself across a couple of minutes of the stuff he's made famous. Okay, fellas, here he is. Fats Waller!
Hey, now, look at here. Who's that walking around this floor here? Sounds like a couple of yard dogs. Mercy. Way up in Harlem at a table for two, there was four of us, me, your big feet knew. From your ankles up, you sure need. But from there down's exactly too much feet. Get your feet too big. Can't stand you 'cause your feet's too big. Say I can't tolerate you 'cause your feet's too big. Join in, choir, join in, yeah. What, where to get on? Running out of your gal, she loves you, thinks you're nice. says you got everything to take you to paradise. Ain't that a pillow? She likes your loving, she likes your ring. But man, oh man, them things is too big. Them things too big. Can't stand you 'cause your feet's too big. Say I can't tolerate you. In fact, I hate you because there's something radically wrong with your pedal extremities. Where'd you get them? Where'd you get them? One never knows, do one? Please, you got some more coming up. Look out. There's a handful of keys. Look out now. I wonder what the poor people are doing tonight. I'd love to be with them, yeah. Be still, my heart, be still. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Come on
That was just totally wonderful and amazing. So my favourite track, plus a handful of keys. And Red and Patty in Glasgow.
Yeah, and that was Dinah Shore who did the announcement.
That was Dinah Shore. What was the date of that? Was there a date
1943.
1943,
yeah.
So no, I don't think there's much chance that Red and Patty might be listening. But
well, you never know.
Well, if any of their descendants are listening, if anybody knows who that is, I'd be very interested to find out. Usual address. That'd be quite funny if there was anybody kind of going, wait a minute, we knew them during the wartime.
That's my granny and grandpa.
Exactly. Yeah.
I asked Alan what his impression of Fats was after doing all the research and interviews that he's done over the years. Did he feel that he was as casual about his talents as he's often made out to be? You know, people often sort of say, oh, you know, he sold his songs for, you know, the price of a hamburger, and, you know, he didn't take himself too seriously. Or was he a stereotypical sad clown, or was he just a bon viveur?
I think it was a real mixture of all those things. Yes, I think there was an element of the sad clown. I think he wanted to play more classical music. He hinted at it, and all his sidemen used to say that he'd sit down and play something serious, and the audience would shout, oh, swing it, Fats, and that's what he'd do, and regret the fact he couldn't play the more reflective stuff. But to be fair, on the other side, he did record a lot of it. So things like his London Suite, which he recorded here, is great reflective piano music, almost like Debussy or Ravel at times. And it certainly shows he was a much deeper artist than you might think from songs like The Spider and the Fly or 24 Robbers or those very funny things. But he was also genuinely funny, and I think, it's very hard to describe somebody being funny in print. It always looks a bit stodgy on the page. But I think all I can do is point people at the records and say, Fats is really genuinely funny. I mean, something like the original version of what's that song about the Harlem Rent Party, The Joint Is Jumpin'? That's a fantastic song. It's got all this sort of patter going on, people coming in, people having a bonfire in the room, all kinds of things, and the police arriving at the end. Fats could make this kind of thing spring to life on a record, and he was a genuinely funny man.
Alan Shipton again, talking about Fats Waller and The Joint Is Jumping.
Yeah, so I thought we'd hear that original, the 1937 version of Joint Is Jumping, which really is what we would call a rammy. I mean, it's just, you know,
so it
all
kind of
hell
totally
breaks loose.
recalls, presumably, one of these rent parties.
One of the rent parties, yeah, which they used to hold to raise the money for somebody's rent. People would pay money at the door to get in, and there would be a pianist.
I had one the other week, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Who was the pianist?
Just me. On my
What
guitar.
did you raise then?
Not enough.
So I thought we'd hear that, Joint is Jumping, and then the more introspective side of Fats, the pianist and the composer, on Chelsea from the London Suite, which he recorded in London in 1939.
They have a new expression along old Harlem way that tells you when a party is 10 times more than gay. To say that things are jumping leaves not a single doubt that everything is in full swing when you hear someone shout. It is, the joint is jumping, it's really jumping. Come in, cats, and check your hats. I mean, this joint is jumping. The piano's thumping, the dancers are bumping. This here spot is more than hot. In fact, the joint is jumping. Check your weapons at the door. Be sure to pay your quarter. Burn your leather on the floor. Grab anybody's daughter. The roof is rocking. The neighbors knocking. We're all bums when the wagon comes. I mean, the joint is jumping. Let it be. Yeah. Sing this joint, boy. Yeah. Oh, my. Yeah. Don't you hit that chick. That's my broad. Where'd you get that stuff at? Well, I'll knock you to your knees. What? Put this cat out of here. What? Get rid of that pistol. Get rid of that pistol. Yeah. Get rid of it. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, man. It's really ready. No, baby, not now. I can't come over there right now. That's good. I need to get to me. Yes, Mr. Woman. Send me Mr. Woman. Yes, you can. I need to get to me. That's it on now. That's me. That's me. I'm on there. Look out there now. The joint is jumping. It's really jumping. Every Moses on his toes. I mean, the joint is jumping. No time for talking. This place is walking, yes. Get the jug and cut the rug. I said the joint is jumping. Listen, get your pig feet bare and gin. There's plenty in the kitchen. Who is that just came in? Just look at the way he's switching. Oh, baby. Don't mind the hour. I'm in power. I got bail if we go to jail. I said the joint is jumping. Don't give your right name. No, no, no.
impressionistic evocation of Chelsea by Fats Waller from the London Suite, 1939. You can imagine Chelsea being a kind of, it's not now, but in those days it would have been a sort of genteel and quiet place where people would have walked about in the gardens, down Sloane Square.
I'll take your word for it.
Knightsbridge Way. No, Knightsbridge is the other. Belgravia is right by there, isn't it? Chelsea. Do you know Chelsea at all?
No.
I had dinner in Chelsea one night in a house of a friend next door to Sir John Benjamin at that time. He complained about her dog barking. It's very amusing. But,
you had to be there.
Obviously, people realise I've fallen in hard times since then. All the details of all the music that you're hearing tonight will be on that website, or you can write to us to get them. The website, of course, is www.bbc.co.uk/Radio Scotland. Click on Bebop to Hip Hop in the programme selector, and then there are various options, as well as hearing it all again. Or for the first time, perhaps. Or you can write to us, as I said, Bebop to Hip Hop, Radio Scotland, Queen Margaret Drive, Glasgow G12, or stay tuned to 92.95 FM, 810 medium wave, Radio Scotland. That's me doing my bit.
Good for you.
So done.
The Shipton book has lots of delightful anecdotes about Fats, especially stories about his generosity and his excessive appetites, which were sort of legendary. So I asked Alan what his own favourite Fats Waller story was.
I think my favourite one is the one about his trumpeter Bugs Hamilton, who was a pretty bon vivant character in his own right, but he was at one of these all-night parties that Fats wanted, and he went and sat on the steps of the bus, because the band, of course, slept on the bus when they were travelling in the south. They weren't allowed into hotels because it was a segregated period. So there he was, sitting on the steps of the bus, crying to be let in and allowed to go to sleep, and Fats said, "Get up, get back in there and enjoy yourself." And so this poor man who was crying with fatigue was forced to go and join the party again. And I think that tells you something about Fats's appetite for life. I mean, it's much greater than those around him.
I mean, there's, the stories about him. There's stories about him handing all the guys in the band a bottle of whiskey or, spirit of some description at the beginning of a tour, so they'd leave him alone with his own supplies because he got through a bottle a day. At least.
Wow. That is, yeah.
So I asked Alan as well about the stories about the legendary capacity for booze.
Certainly, I unearthed, when I was doing the original edition of the book, somebody who remembered Fats's recording sessions from London. Since then, actually, I talked to Edmundo Ross, the drummer and former Radio 2 presenter, who confirmed this. And he said, yes, Fats used to have a bottle of whiskey on the piano at the beginning of the session, and by the end of the session, it was empty. Now, I mean, for somebody to be able to drink that amount in itself is amazing, but to be able to play the piano faultlessly at the end of it seems to me to be paranormal kind of abilities with the hands.
Yeah, and the head, I would have thought, being able to remain compos mentis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that...
I mean, he's quite a big man, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very big man. But I think that track the radio stuff we were listening to a while ago with the Joint is Jumping and Handful of Keys, I think that's probably, safe to say he was well oiled when he was doing that. Maybe a wee bit more than usual even, because, as he did lose the place a wee bit in what he was playing. And
I think in those days people also didn't kind of think, this is really bad for your health if you do this kind of thing to yourself.
I think they wondered about him, mind you, and he did die at the age of,
young.
He did die at the age of 39, and he ate a ton as well. So I mean, we're probably absorbing some of.
Maybe if you eat a lot, and that's the theory. Anyway,
somewhere
isn't
to put it.
That's the theory we all work on, isn't it? Yeah, if I eat all this rice, it'll soak up all that whiskey and beer I've been drinking. Not tonight though, because
no.
Okay.
Alan Shipton's book also makes the point that Fats was much more than simply a pianist, and he had a number of different roles which we were talking about earlier. But what I wondered was which role was really most important to him.
His friends always said that the instrument that he really loved above all others, and the thing that he felt he was never really appreciated for, was playing the organ. He was a fantastic organist, and in fact, some of the discs he made in London in 1938 at the big organ at Abbey Road Studios are really marvellous. It was a pipe organ. It wasn't one of these kind of electronic organs that you get in studios now, but it was a full-scale theatrical organ built by Comptons, and it's got all kinds of bells and whistles and different stops on it. And he made some absolutely sensational recordings of Negro spirituals, as they were called at the time, including a marvellous version of Go Down Moses, where you almost think that this is Fats Waller playing jazz with a little bit of Messiaen thrown in.
Go down, Moses.
I was just thinking how sort of dramatic that sounds, you know, because I wonder whether it's maybe because he started off playing organ for silent movies.
It definitely
You
has
know,
that kind
it's
of...
got that
you,
kind
you
of
expect
very...
Lon Chaney to appear out of
and
the
it's,
mist.
but it's also just, you know, got lots of different kind of emotions and things in it, hasn't it?
Yeah, Go Down, Moses, Night of the Zombies.
Fats is often said to be poorly represented by his recording legacy, that his sidemen weren't up to scratch and that he sacrificed music for mugging it up and stuff like that. And I asked Alan how he felt about that.
I think that towards the end, the last years of his recording with the band, he was made to record some pretty dreadful stuff. I can't think of anybody but Fats who'd make sense of a song like I Love to Whistle, or some of the later things like She's Tall, She's Tan, She's Terrific, which were really pretty mediocre songs, but Fats could give them some kind of zest and energy that would still sell them, whereas perhaps no other performer could do that. So there is a sense in which RCA pushed him to record a load of stuff that was really pretty marginal. And for that, I think it's a great shame. It would be wonderful if he'd been able, as Louis Armstrong was, for example, to record really great songs a lot of the time. If you compare Fats's output from the 30s with that of Armstrong, you find Armstrong recording classic after classic after classic, and I'm talking about the compositions themselves. Whereas Fats, when he wasn't doing his own numbers or making covers of well-known songs by other people, did have to record an awful lot of really bad stuff, and for that reason, I think he was badly served.
That's interesting, isn't it? That perhaps... the record industry of the time wasn't particularly favourable to a musician like Fats Waller.
Well, I think they saw that he was somebody who could make these, you know, who could sell things, you know, and he really could bring life to any kind of material, and so they just kept, you know, feeding it to him. They kept making him record this stuff, which really was substandard, a lot of it. One of the things I found particularly interesting in the book, and something that I never had occurred to me, Alan argues that one of the songs that Fats co-wrote and recorded for the film Stormy Weather, a song called Moppin' and Boppin', hints at how his music might have evolved if he'd lived beyond 1943. So I asked him to explain this theory to us.
This was made in 1943 as part of the soundtrack for Stormy Weather, and it was a victim of the American recording ban, but because it was recorded as part of a film soundtrack, it survived, and actually it was first issued on V-disc during the war. And it's got Fats and Benny Carter. They wrote this tune together, and Benny Carter was always somebody who had an eye on the future. I'm not quite sure whether he wrote the first bit and Fats wrote the middle, or whether they wrote the whole thing together. But what you get here is a sense of the ensemble of the band playing the tune, just as those small groups with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie ended up playing the tunes 2 or 3 years later. So you get a sense of the ensemble dropping this idea of the frontline instruments all weaving in and out of each other. They're playing the same rhyme, that riff that goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it just sounds like a bop tune. And then you hear the chording in Fats's own solo, and he's certainly been listening to people like Clyde Hart, Art Tatum, who are playing rather more adventurous chords than you hear in Fats's own work from 2 or 3 years earlier.
Moppin' and Boppin' from 1943. Yeah, a kind of different Fats there.
And funny how
yeah.
the bop is actually in the title of it as well, sort of,
Well, it was
anticipating.
certainly there, but when I was kind of 42, people were talking about bebop.
Yeah, well...
Yeah. Don't argue with me. Yeah, so...
Oh, well, I asked Alan if he thought that Fats would have gone on to be remembered as more of a showbiz personality had he lived longer.
Well, I think you have to remember that he was that already at the time he died. I mean, he was, in some ways, in 1943, when he died, he was even more successful than Louis because he was well known as a theatre composer. And indeed, his show Early to Bed, which was the last thing he wrote, was actually running on Broadway at the time he died. And he said to everybody around him that what he wanted to do was give up the road, return to New York and spend more time composing. So I think he might actually, very interestingly, have turned into one of the great show composers of the second half of the century. So as well as already having sort of eclipsed Louis as a popular entertainer in the 30s and early 40s, I think Fats could have gone on to be, as it were, another Gershwin. I think that there's only one way that Fats will really be looked back on in, say, 100 years' time, and that is as the greatest pianist of his generation. There's no doubt that without Fats there would have been no Art Tatum. I mean, the whole line of jazz piano that carried on after him comes from this man who somehow took everything that the stride players like James P. Johnson and Willie the Lion Smith developed and made it his own, and developed it technically at a level that threw in all kinds of things from the classical piano touch, the approach, the attack to the keyboard, and developed the language of the piano. So he, for me, is the consummate pianist of the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I asked Alan to tell us what his own personal choice of Fats Waller track would be.
My all-time favourite track comes from the 1941 solo piano session that he made for RCA Victor. He recorded a lot of things at that, including a great version of James P. Johnson's Carolina Shout. But for me, the one that I'll always treasure is his recording of Ellington's Ring Dem Bells.
Okay, and we will listen to Ellington's Ring Dem Bells in a moment. A fascinating sort of resuming of Fats Waller's life and work there. The combination of Alison Kerr and Alan Shipton, of course. So we should say that Fats Waller, The Cheerful Little Earful by Alan Shipton, and a revised edition is published by Continuum Books, and presumably it will be out in the shops in time for Christmas.
Oh, yes.
Are you going to get a copy for Christmas, or are you having this one?
That's mine. I think you're holding it.
Oh, is that yours?
David.
All right. I'd better give it back to you and say thank you very much, Alison,
You're welcome.
for joining us, and we'll see you in a few weeks' time. And what's happening next week is we've got Elliot Meadow doing the anatomy of a recording session. Elliot attended quite a number of recording sessions in his career in the States, and he's going to be sort of analysing the recording session. So that should be, well worth listening out for. So that's going to be in next week's programme. And then the week after that, we've got Simon Hodge. And then for our Christmas programme, we've got Cachaito in concert recorded at the Fruit Market in Glasgow as part of the International Jazz Festival. So that's going to be coming up in 2 weeks' time. And it'll be Christmas already. Can you believe that, Alison? Christmas is coming.
No, it can't be.
Well, you know what they say about Christmas time. You know, you have to ring them bells, which is what we're going to go out with. So as we aim for that, I'll remind you, you've been listening to Bebop to Hip Hop on Radio Scotland, www.bbc.co.uk/Radio Scotland. Then click on Bebop to Hip Hop in the programme selector. You can also write to me, david.sillers@bbc.co.uk. And you can write to us at Bebop to Hip Hop, Radio Scotland, Queen Margaret Drive, Glasgow G12. Stay tuned to Radio Scotland on 92 to 95 FM and 810 medium wave. And join us again next week with an hour of me with a roundup of what's new and what's re-released, and Elliot Meadow with the anatomy of a recording session. Meantime, ring them bells and stay cool.